It's time again for the Insiders with Chuck Chvala and Scott Jensen, sponsored by the Wisconsin Counties Association and the Tommy G. Thompson Center on Public Leadership.
Hi, I'm Chuck Chvala, former Senate Majority Leader.
And I'm Scott Jensen, former Assembly Speaker.
Well, Scott, we're the Insiders. And so, Scott, the Marquette poll came out, the Bible for everybody looking at politics in the state. What's your takeaway from the poll from Marquette?
You know, sometimes that poll comes out and I think, there's nothing new in there. I knew that. And then sometimes it's just fascinating. And I think this one was kind of fascinating. For example, we big debate going on over the last few months about the UW and its budget. I was surprised to see only 27% of the people in Wisconsin thought you should increase the UW budget. Most people thought it should either be the same or cut. I think that shows a couple things. One is that the value proposition for college has clearly fallen. People don't think a college degree is quite worth as much as they thought it was before, and the investment by parents and by taxpayers. And also there's this troubling concern that more conservative voters have that the UW is really into politics rather than education. It's more interested in indoctrinating kids than educating them. And therefore, they just don't think it's worth as much as it was before. On the other hand, I thought it was interesting that historically in Wisconsin, when it comes to K-12 education spending, people have said how important that was, and it was more important to put more money in the schools than it was to cut our property taxes. For this poll shows more voters say, yeah, no, it's time to cut my property taxes rather than to put more money into the schools. So favor a property tax cut over increased education spending. The thing that wasn't a surprise to me is that the voters of the state appear to be reluctant to give anyone a third term. They said, should Tony Evers get a third term? A majority of voters said no, just a narrow majority. It was the same way when Scott Walker was running for a third term. They were like, I don't think so. In fact, we've only had one person get a third four-year term in the history of Wisconsin. Only think there was one governor who got a third two-year term. That's it. I mean, so we're just like it. That is embedded in the Wisconsin culture. Like that's enough time for one guy, time to switch to somebody else. On the other hand, that same poll says, oh, we like Tony Evers. He's doing a good job. But they're reluctant to have him run for a third term. What do you think about that?
Well, certainly the history in Wisconsin on the third term is as Scott portrays it. And I think that people do after a period of time, at the national level, we now have it restricted to 2 terms for the president. And I think what happens is that people feel that it's time to get some new ideas and things going. And that is a common thing. And like you say, Tommy Thompson was the only one to pull it off. Of course, seeing Tommy Thompson and looking at this, you realize that there are a lot of other factors that go into people's decision. It's not like they walk into the voting booth and say, oh, third term, there's no way. But even if it's a small percentage of people, I think a lot of it too is just they've seen the person around for quite a while, and maybe they feel that they've done what they feel they're going to get done, and then they want to move on to something else. The different dynamic that's happening here, well, there are a lot of things that we could go into on that. But I think that the property tax thing is an interesting thing. And by the way, I think that most people would be concerned if you're a progressive saying, ooh, that means that people aren't willing to fund public schools. I don't think that's true. I think the way that Democrats will be the ones who want to do this. The Democrats are the ones who care about and believe in public education, number one. That's their big thing. I think the way that Democrats deal with this is when they put money in to fund public education, they need to also put money in to bring down property taxes. In fact, the one thing in this budget that I think Democrats should really be pushing on is not having a tax reduction for retirement and instead pushing that money to property tax relief. Property tax relief, again, is coming back, and it wasn't the time when Scott and I were around, as the number one tax that people dislike. That is not the Republican priority. The Republicans want tax cuts or income taxes because that disproportionately goes to people who are wealthier, just percentage-wise. That's the way it works. It's by definition. But the property tax thing, you can have senior citizens, by the way, and a lot of other people who maybe house poor. In other words, they have a bigger house than what they need. They're paying a property tax on it. It's a tax basically on the wealth that middle class people have. So I think that although just off the top, you would think that the natural conclusion would be, well, that helps Republicans. I think in the long run, it will help Democrats, but we'll see. But the poll, I agree with Scott. This was a very interesting poll with some results that people were not expecting. And the third term thing was certainly part of that as well.
We'll see if the poll's right in the days ahead.
See you next time.
You've been listening to The Insider with Chuck Chvala and Scott Jensen, sponsored by the Wisconsin Counties Association and the Tommy G. Thompson Center on Public Leadership.